The coffee shop was buzzing with its usual morning crowd when the woman in the expensive business suit walked up to me at the espresso machine, her phone pressed to her ear and impatience radiating from every perfectly manicured gesture. "Excuse me," she said, not bothering to end her call. "I ordered a skinny vanilla latte 10 minutes ago. Where is it?" I glanced at the order queue, then back at her. "It'll be ready in just a moment. We're working through the morning rush." She rolled her eyes dramatically, speaking louder into her phone. "I'm sorry, Brad. I'm dealing with incompetent staff here. Some barista who clearly doesn't understand customer service." I kept working on the espresso shots, fighting back a smile. This happened more often than people might think. "Look," she continued, now addressing me directly while still holding her phone, "I have a very important meeting in 15 minutes. I can't be late because your people can't make a simple coffee order efficiently." "I understand your frustration," I replied, focusing on the milk steaming. "Your latte will be perfect in about 30 seconds. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said into her phone, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "No sense of urgency, no customer service training. I swear, these minimum wage workers just don't care about anything." The businessman behind her in line shifted uncomfortably. I caught his eye and gave him a reassuring nod. He'd been coming here every morning for 3 years, and we'd had countless conversations about everything from local politics to his daughter's college applications. "Medium dark roast, splash of cream, no sugar," I said, handing him his usual before even looking at the order screen. "Thanks, Mike," he said with a grateful smile. "See you tomorrow." The woman in the suit watched this interaction with growing irritation. "Excuse me, but I was here first. Why is he getting his order before mine?" "His order was simpler and already prepared," I explained, adding the vanilla syrup to her latte. "Your drink required more time." "This is ridiculous," she huffed into her phone. "I'm going to speak to the manager about this lazy employee. There's no excuse for this kind of service." "That's a good idea," I said, putting the finishing touches on her latte and sliding it across the counter. "You should definitely talk to management." She grabbed the cup without a thank you, still complaining loudly to whoever was on the other end of her call. "I'm telling you, Brad, the quality of service these days is just appalling. These people have no work ethic, no pride in what they do." The regular customers around us were starting to exchange glances. Sarah, who came in every Tuesday and Thursday before her yoga class, was trying to suppress a grin. Tommy, the college student who studied here most afternoons, was openly smirking behind his laptop. "I mean, look at this guy," the woman continued, gesturing toward me while still on her call. "Probably in his 30s, working a coffee shop job, no ambition, no drive. This is what happens when people don't apply themselves." I continued cleaning the espresso machine, letting her rant continue. The morning regulars knew what was coming, and I could see several of them positioning themselves to get a better view. "These minimum wage workers just don't understand what it means to build something, to create value, to actually contribute to society," she was saying. "I didn't get where I am by settling for mediocrity." "That's interesting," I said, looking up from the machine. "What is it that you do?" She paused her phone conversation, clearly pleased to have an opportunity to establish her superiority. "I'm a senior marketing director at Pinnacle Consulting. We handle high-end commercial real estate developments. I make more in a month than people like you probably see in a year." "That sounds like important work," I replied. "Commercial real estate can be pretty complex." "Exactly. It requires education, ambition, strategic thinking, skills that," she gestured dismissively around the coffee shop, "obviously aren't needed for this kind of work." Several customers were now openly watching the conversation unfold. Maria, who owned the boutique down the street, had stopped mid-sip of her cappuccino. Even Janet, who usually kept to herself while reading the morning news, had looked up from her tablet. "So, what about you?" the woman asked with condescending curiosity. "What exactly do you do for a living? I mean, besides..." She waved her hand toward the espresso machine. "This?" The question hung in the air for a moment. The regular customers leaned forward slightly, anticipating what was about to happen. I set down my cleaning cloth and looked directly at her. "I own this place." The silence that followed was beautiful. The woman's mouth literally fell open, her phone nearly slipping from her grasp. The executive who had been so confident in her assumptions about minimum wage workers and lack of ambition suddenly found herself face to face with someone who had built exactly the kind of business she claimed to understand. "You, what?" she stammered. "I own this coffee shop," I repeated calmly. "Actually, I own this entire building, and the one next to it. Also, the building across the street where your office is located." Her face cycled through several different expressions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally something approaching panic as she realized she was still on a call with her colleague. I have to go," she said quickly into her phone, ending the call without explanation. The cafe had gone completely quiet except for the gentle hum of the espresso machine and the soft jazz playing through the speakers. Every customer was watching this moment unfold with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching a spectacular car accident in slow motion. "That's impossible," she said finally. "You're working behind the counter. You're making coffee." "I like making coffee," I replied. "I also like talking to customers, perfecting recipes, and staying connected to the day-to-day operations of my business. It's hard to run a place effectively if you don't understand how it actually works." The woman looked around the cafe as if seeing it for the first time. The exposed brick walls, the custom-built shelving, the carefully curated artwork from local artists, the high-end espresso equipment that probably cost more than her car. "But you're dressed like," she gestured at my jeans and simple black t-shirt. "Like someone who works for a living?" I suggested. "Yeah, I find it more comfortable than a suit when I'm actually working." Sarah couldn't contain herself anymore and started laughing. This broke the tension, and several other customers joined in with gentle chuckles and appreciative murmurs. "I don't understand," the woman said, still struggling to process this information. "If you own this place, why are you working behind the counter?" It was a fair question, and one I got occasionally from people who discovered my actual role here. "Because this is my business," I explained. "I started this place 8 years ago with my life savings and a small business loan. I worked every shift for the first 2 years because I couldn't afford to hire enough staff. Even now that we're successful, I still work behind the counter several days a week." "But why? You could hire people to do this." "I could, and I do have a full staff of excellent baristas. But working behind the counter keeps me connected to what our customers actually want. It helps me understand which products work and which don't. It shows me how our systems and processes actually function rather than how they look on paper." I gestured around the bustling cafe. "Every improvement we've made to this place, from the menu items to the layout to the service flow, came from insights I gained by working directly with customers and seeing how things actually operated." The woman was starting to recover from her initial shock, but her confusion was evident. "That's unusual." "Maybe, but it works. We've been profitable every year since year 2. We've expanded to 3 locations. And our customer satisfaction ratings are consistently high." Tommy, the college student, looked up from his laptop. "Mike makes the best espresso in the city," he said. "I've been coming here for 2 years, and I've watched him train every barista personally. He knows more about coffee than anyone I've ever met." Maria nodded in agreement. "He also supports local artists, hosts community events, and helped organize the Small Business Association for this district. This isn't just a coffee shop. It's a community hub." The woman in the suit was clearly struggling to reconcile her assumptions about business ownership with the reality of someone who actually worked in their own business. "I still don't understand why you would do manual labor when you could be focusing on bigger picture things." "What bigger picture things?" I asked genuinely. "You know, strategy, expansion, networking, management, the kinds of things that actually build wealth and create value." I considered this for a moment. "I do focus on those things. But I do them in the context of understanding how my business actually operates. How can I make strategic decisions about our coffee menu if I don't know how each drink tastes or how long it takes to prepare? How can I plan our staffing levels if I don't understand our customer flow patterns?" "You could get reports about those things." "I could, and I do get reports. But reports tell you what happened, not why it happened, or how it felt to the people involved. Working behind the counter gives me insights that no report could provide." The conversation was attracting attention from other customers who had been quietly listening while trying to appear focused on their own activities. "Plus," I continued, "I genuinely enjoy the work. I like crafting the perfect espresso shot. I like solving problems in real time. I like building relationships with customers who become part of our community. But surely your time would be more valuable spent on higher-level activities. More valuable to whom? I asked. To my customers who get better service because I understand their needs? To my employees who have a boss who understands their daily challenges? To my business, which succeeds because I make decisions based on real operational knowledge rather than abstract theories? The woman seemed to be processing this information, but it clearly challenged everything she believed about business leadership and success. I guess I just assumed that successful business owners would delegate the day-to-day work. Some do, and that works well for some businesses and some people. But I've found that staying connected to the daily operations makes me a better owner and leader. Janet, who had been listening while pretending to read her news, finally spoke up. Mike revolutionized the customer experience here. When I first started coming here 5 years ago, it was just another coffee shop. Now it's the kind of place where they know your name, your order, and ask about your family. He also figured out the optimal workflow for peak hours, added Sarah. I used to wait 15 minutes for my morning latte. Now, even during the busiest times, it's rarely more than 5 minutes. That's because I worked every position and timed every process, I explained. I couldn't have optimized our operations without understanding exactly how each step worked and where the bottlenecks occurred. The woman was beginning to look uncomfortable, perhaps realizing that her dismissive comments about minimum wage workers and lack of ambition had been directed at someone who had probably accomplished more than she had. I should apologize, she said finally. I made assumptions that were clearly wrong. No harm done, I replied. It happens more often than you might think. People see someone working behind a counter and assume they know everything about that person's situation and capabilities. But you really own this building? And others? Real estate is a good investment when you understand the local market, I said. I bought this building when I opened the coffee shop because I wanted control over the lease terms. The success of the business made it possible to acquire additional properties. How many properties do you own? 6 buildings in this district, a mix of commercial and residential. The rental income provides financial stability that allows me to take risks with new business ventures. The woman's expression was shifting from embarrassment to what looked like professional curiosity. What kinds of new ventures? We're opening a roastery next month, also launching a line of specialty coffee products for retail sale, and I'm working with 3 other local business owners to develop a food hall concept. That's actually pretty impressive. Thank you. But the point is that none of these expansion projects would be possible without the foundation of understanding how to run a profitable day-to-day operation. I think I'm beginning to understand, she said slowly. You're saying that working in the business helps you work on the business. Exactly. There's a difference between knowing how something is supposed to work and knowing how it actually works. The difference between theory and practice. The morning rush was beginning to wind down, and the conversation had reached a natural pause. The woman looked at her watch and seemed to remember her scheduled meeting. I should go, she said, but I wanted to ask, do you have a business card? My company sometimes works with property developers, and it might be worth connecting. I reached under the counter and handed her one of my cards. She read it carefully, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the information. Meridian Properties, she read aloud, Commercial and Residential Development, Michael Chen, founder and CEO. That's the real estate side of things, I explained. The coffee shops are more of a passion project that turned into a good business. She stared at the card for a moment longer. I feel like I should ask, what's your annual revenue? I smiled. Probably more than we need to discuss in a coffee shop. Right, of course. She tucked the card into her purse, still looking somewhat dazed. I'll be in touch about potential collaboration opportunities. Sounds good, and thanks for the feedback about our service. It's always helpful to hear different perspectives. As she headed toward the door, I heard her phone ring. She answered it just before stepping outside. Brad, yeah, it's me. Listen, about that conversation earlier. Her voice faded as the door closed behind her. The cafe gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but several customers lingered to chat about what they'd just witnessed. That was spectacular, said Tommy. I've been waiting for something like that to happen for months. She seemed nice enough, I replied diplomatically, just operating from some assumptions that turned out to be incorrect. Assumptions about what? Asked Maria. About what success looks like, what business ownership means, and how you can tell whether someone is ambitious or accomplished just by looking at their current activity. Sarah was finishing her latte and preparing to leave for yoga class. I love that you still work behind the counter. It's one of the reasons this place feels so authentic. Thanks. I think customers can tell when a business is run by people who actually care about the work, rather than just the profits. Do you think she'll actually call about business opportunities? Asked Janet. Maybe. Commercial real estate people often have interesting projects, though I suspect she'll do some research on our company before making that call. What will she find when she researches you? Tommy asked with curiosity. Probably more than she's expecting. The real estate business has been pretty successful over the past few years. I didn't mention that our property development company had been featured in the Business Journal 3 times in the past year, or that we'd just closed a deal on a $12 million mixed-use development project, or that I'd been invited to speak at 2 commercial real estate conferences this year. The morning crowd continued to thin out as people headed to their offices and appointments. I was restocking the pastry case when my phone buzzed with a text from my business partner. David wants to know if you're still planning to attend the mayor's economic development meeting this afternoon, I read aloud to myself. What's that about? Asked Maria, who was lingering over her cappuccino. The city's planning a new initiative to support small business growth. They want input from local business owners about what kinds of programs would be most helpful. That sounds important. It could be. Small business is the backbone of communities like this one. Getting the policy framework right makes a huge difference in whether entrepreneurs can succeed. Will you mention what happened here this morning? I laughed. Probably not, though it does illustrate some interesting points about how people think about work and success. What kinds of points? That people often assume someone's capabilities and accomplishments based on very limited information. That there's still a cultural bias that sees hands-on work as less valuable than abstract management. That we've somehow developed the idea that successful people don't do regular work anymore. Is that bias a problem for small businesses? I think it can be. It creates pressure for business owners to distance themselves from the actual work of their businesses. To hire managers and consultants and focus on high-level strategy instead of understanding how their operations actually function. But you obviously don't believe in that approach. Not for my businesses, anyway. I think staying connected to the day-to-day work makes me a better leader and results in better outcomes for customers and employees. Plus, you clearly enjoy it. I do. There's something satisfying about crafting a perfect espresso or solving an operational problem in real time. It's more immediate and tangible than most management activities. The door chimed as a new customer entered, a young woman in her 20s, wearing business casual attire and looking nervous. Excuse me, she said hesitantly. I'm supposed to meet someone here for a job interview. Are you the manager? I'm Mike, I said. Are you here about the assistant manager position? Yes, I'm Jennifer. I'm a few minutes early. Perfect timing. Would you like a coffee while we talk? That would be great. Thank you. As I prepared her drink, I noticed Maria and the other remaining customers discreetly watching this interaction with obvious amusement. They'd just witnessed my revelation as the business owner, and now they were seeing me transition seamlessly into conducting a job interview. Here you go, I said, handing Jennifer her latte. Should we sit over there by the window? This is such a beautiful space, Jennifer said as we settled into our seats. I've been coming here as a customer for months, and I've always been impressed by how smoothly everything runs. Thank you. We work hard to create a good experience for customers and a good environment for employees. I have to ask, are you the owner? The job posting mentioned that I'd be interviewing with management, but everyone I've talked to today has mentioned someone named Mike who owns the place. I smiled. Yes, I'm the owner. I also work behind the counter several days a week and handle a lot of the day-to-day management responsibilities. That's amazing. I've never worked for a business where the owner was so hands-on. It works well for us. What questions do you have about the position? The interview continued for about 20 minutes, covering Jennifer's experience, her interest in coffee culture, her thoughts about customer service, and her career goals. She was clearly qualified and enthusiastic, and I found myself impressed by her thoughtful responses. "One last question," I said as we concluded. "How do you feel about working for someone who sometimes works alongside the staff rather than just managing from an office?" "Honestly, I think it sounds ideal. In my last job, the owners were completely disconnected from daily operations. They made decisions that sounded good in theory but created problems for employees and customers. I'd love to work for someone who actually understands what we do." "Excellent. I think you'd be a great fit for our team. When would you be able to start?" "Really? You're offering me the position?" "Unless you have other questions or concerns." "No, I'm thrilled. I could start next Monday if that works." "Perfect. I'll have Sarah, our current assistant manager, show you around and start your training." As Jennifer left with obvious excitement, Maria approached the counter with her empty cup. "That was lovely to watch," she said. "You conduct job interviews the same way you make coffee, with attention to detail and genuine care." "Thank you. Finding the right people is crucial for a business like this." I bet Jennifer had no idea she was interviewing with someone who owns multiple buildings and development companies. Probably not. But that's not really relevant to whether she'll be good at helping us provide excellent service to our customers. Still, it must be nice to surprise people with who you actually are. Sometimes. Though I'd rather be judged on the quality of our work than the size of our business portfolio. The afternoon crowd was beginning to filter in, students looking for study spaces, professionals taking meetings, people seeking a quiet place to read or work on laptops. The rhythm of the coffee shop shifted from the urgent energy of the morning rush to the more relaxed pace of midday. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from someone I didn't recognize. "Mr. Chen, this is Amanda Morrison from Pinnacle Consulting. We met briefly this morning at your coffee shop. I wanted to follow up about potential collaboration opportunities. Would you have time for a call this week?" I showed the message to Maria, who was still lingering at the counter. "She works fast," Maria observed. "Professional curiosity, probably. Plus, she might be trying to recover from the awkwardness of this morning." "Will you take the call?" "Sure. Business is business, and commercial real estate people often have interesting projects." Even after she was so rude about minimum wage workers and lack of ambition? Everyone operates from assumptions that sometimes turn out to be wrong. The question is whether they can learn from new information and adjust their perspective. "You're more generous than I would be." "Maybe. But holding grudges isn't good for business or personal well-being." The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, with the usual mix of regulars and new customers. I spent time training one of our newer baristas on latte art techniques, reviewed inventory numbers with our supplier, and confirmed details for tomorrow's delivery of beans from our new roasting partner. Around 4 o'clock, David texted to remind me about the economic development meeting. "Heading out to City Hall," I announced to the staff. "Jennifer will be starting Monday as assistant manager, and I'll be in tomorrow morning for the usual shift." "See you tomorrow, boss," called Maria, who was working on her laptop in the corner. "See you tomorrow, Mike," I corrected with a smile. The economic development meeting was held in the city council chambers, with about 30 local business owners in attendance. I recognized most of them: restaurant owners, retail shop managers, service providers, and fellow property developers. "Before we begin," announced Councilwoman Patterson, "I'd like everyone to introduce themselves and briefly describe their business." The introductions went around the room. "I'm Susan, I own the boutique on 5th Street. I'm Carlos, I run the auto repair shop on Main. I'm Jennifer, I manage the hardware store downtown." When it reached me, I said simply, "I'm Mike, I own the coffee shop on 3rd Street. Several people nodded in recognition, but no one seemed surprised by my modest introduction. It wasn't until later in the meeting, when the discussion turned to property development and zoning issues, that my other business interests became relevant. "We need to consider how new developments will impact existing small businesses," I said during the discussion. "Large-scale projects can either support local businesses or displace them, depending on how they're planned and implemented." "That's a good point," said Councilwoman Patterson. "Do you have experience with development projects?" "Some," I replied. "I think the key is ensuring that new developments complement existing businesses, rather than competing with them. After the meeting, several people approached me with questions about property development and small business strategy. It became clear that my reputation in the real estate community was well known among local business leaders, even if I didn't lead with that information. "I had no idea you were involved in the Harbor District development," said Carlos from the auto repair shop. "That project is going to transform the entire waterfront." "We tried to design it in a way that would benefit existing businesses in the area," I replied. "Mixed-use developments work best when they enhance the character of a neighborhood rather than replacing it." "Is it true that you still work in your coffee shop?" asked Susan from the boutique. "Several days a week, yeah." "That's incredible. Most developers I know wouldn't be caught dead doing manual labor." "I don't think of it as manual labor. I think of it as staying connected to the operational side of business." The conversation continued as we walked to the parking lot, covering topics like customer service, employee management, and community development. It struck me that many of these business owners were dealing with similar challenges, despite operating in completely different industries. "We should do this more often," suggested Carlos. "Get together to discuss shared challenges and opportunities." "That's a great idea," I agreed. "Maybe we could organize regular meetings for local business owners." "Would you be interested in helping coordinate something like that?" asked Susan. "Absolutely. Community building is good for everyone's business." As I drove home, I reflected on the day's events. The morning's encounter with the woman from Pinnacle Consulting had been amusing, but it had also highlighted some interesting assumptions people make about work, success, and business ownership. Most people seem to believe that success meant distancing yourself from day-to-day work, that management meant delegating everything, and that wealth meant never having to do manual labor again. But my experience had been exactly the opposite. The more successful my businesses became, the more important it was to stay connected to how they actually operated. The more wealth I accumulated, the more freedom I had to work on things I genuinely enjoyed, rather than things I felt obligated to do. Working behind the counter wasn't something I had to do. It was something I chose to do because it made me better at everything else I did. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. The caller ID showed Amanda Morrison from Pinnacle Consulting. "Hello, Amanda," I answered. "Mr. Chen, thank you for taking my call. I wanted to apologize again for this morning and to follow up on potential collaboration opportunities." "No need to apologize. What kinds of projects are you working on?" "We're developing a mixed-use complex in the downtown area that would include retail space, office suites, and residential units. We're looking for experienced developers who understand the local market." "That sounds interesting. What's the timeline?" "We're in the early planning stages now, with construction potentially beginning next year. Would you be interested in a meeting to discuss details?" "Sure. Though I should mention that my approach to development projects emphasizes community impact and existing business support." "That's exactly what we're looking for. The city has made it clear that they want developments that enhance rather than disrupt existing neighborhoods." "Good. That aligns well with my priorities." We scheduled a meeting for the following week and discussed some preliminary details about the project scope and investment requirements. "Can I ask you something?" Amanda said as we concluded the call. "Of course." "This morning, when I made those comments about minimum wage workers and lack of ambition, did you know what I was going to discover about who you actually are?" I laughed. "I had a pretty good idea. Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because your assumptions told me more about how you think about work and people than anything I could have said. And because sometimes people learn more from discovering their mistakes than from being corrected before they make them." "That's actually a very wise approach." "Thank you. I look forward to our meeting next week." After hanging up, I sat in my car for a moment thinking about the day's events. The morning's encounter had been entertaining, but it had also reminded me why I valued staying connected to the day-to-day work of my businesses. When you work alongside your employees, you understand their challenges and can make better decisions about policies and procedures. When you interact directly with customers, you learn what they actually want rather than what you think they want. When you understand how your business operates at every level, you can identify opportunities for improvement that might not be visible from a management office. But most importantly, when you stay connected to the work itself, you remember why you started the business in the first place. I hadn't opened a coffee shop to become a real estate mogul. I'd opened it because I loved coffee, enjoyed creating community spaces, and wanted to build something meaningful. The real estate success had emerged from understanding local markets and recognizing opportunities, but it was rooted in the same principles that made the coffee shop successful: attention to detail, focus on customer needs, and commitment to quality. As I walked into my house, my phone buzzed with one final text of the day, this time from Jennifer, the new assistant manager. "Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm so excited to start Monday. I've been telling everyone that I'll be working for the most hands-on business owner I've ever met." I smiled and texted back, "Looking forward to working with you. See you Monday morning." They had asked what I did for a living, and when I said I owned the place, they had indeed choked. But the real surprise wasn't that I owned the coffee shop. The real surprise was that owning the place had never stopped me from doing the work. And that, more than anything else, was what made all the difference. They had asked what I did for a living, and when I said I owned the place, they had indeed choked. But the real surprise wasn't that I owned the coffee shop. The real surprise was that owning the place had never stopped me from doing the work. And that, more than anything else, was what made all the difference. The following Monday morning brought Jennifer's first day, along with an unexpected rush of customers who seemed unusually interested in observing our newest team member. Word had apparently spread through the neighborhood about Friday's encounter with the woman from Pinnacle Consulting, and our regular customers were curious to see how we'd handle training a new assistant manager. "Is it true that someone mistook you for a minimum wage employee?" Jennifer asked quietly as I showed her how to calibrate the espresso machine. "It happens occasionally," I replied. "People make assumptions based on where they see you working rather than what you actually do. Doesn't that bother you?" "Not really. Their assumptions tell me more about them than they do about me." Jennifer was a quick learner, and by mid-morning she was handling the register with confidence while I worked alongside our regular barista Marcus on drink preparation. The morning rush was particularly busy, but the three of us fell into a rhythm that kept orders moving smoothly. "Jennifer's fitting in well," observed Dr. Williams, a retired professor who came in every Monday for his weekly chess game with another regular. "You have a good eye for hiring." "Thank you. Finding people who understand customer service and can work as part of a team is crucial." "Speaking of teams, I heard through the grapevine that you're organizing some kind of local business association." "We're exploring the idea. There seems to be interest in having regular meetings where local business owners can discuss shared challenges and opportunities." "That's an excellent initiative. This neighborhood has a strong sense of community, but the business owners don't always have opportunities to collaborate." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of three people in expensive suits who clearly weren't our usual clientele. They looked around the space with the kind of analytical scrutiny that suggested they were evaluating rather than simply enjoying. "Good morning," I said as they approached the counter. "What can I get for you?" "We're here to meet with the owner," announced the woman in the center, who appeared to be the leader of the group. "I'm Patricia Hawthorne from Metropolitan Development Corporation." "I'm Mike," I replied. "How can I help you?" She looked confused. "We're looking for the owner of this establishment. We have a business proposition to discuss." "You're talking to him." The three of them exchanged glances that clearly conveyed surprise and skepticism. "You're the owner?" asked one of the men. "That's right." "But you're working behind the counter." "Also correct." Patricia recovered her composure quickly. "Well, this is unexpected. We represent a major development corporation that's interested in acquiring properties in this district for a large-scale retail complex." "What kind of retail complex?" "Mixed-use development with national chain stores, restaurants, and entertainment venues. We're prepared to make very generous offers for key properties in this area." I continued preparing drinks while listening to their proposal. "Which properties are you interested in?" "This building, obviously, plus the surrounding block. We understand you own several properties here." "I do." "Excellent. We're prepared to offer significantly above market value for a package deal." Jennifer was listening to this conversation while trying to appear focused on her training. Marcus had slowed his work pace to better follow the discussion. Several customers were openly eavesdropping. "What would happen to the existing businesses?" I asked. "They would be relocated or compensated, of course. The new development would bring much more economic activity to the area." "What kind of economic activity?" Major retail chains, franchise restaurants, a multiplex cinema, the kinds of businesses that draw significant consumer traffic. And the local businesses that are currently here? Patricia shrugged. Most of them would probably not be suitable for the new development. The lease rates would be substantially higher, and the demographic target would be different. So you're planning to replace the local businesses with national chains? We're planning to maximize the economic potential of this district. That requires businesses with proven track records and substantial marketing reach. I finished the drinks I was preparing and handed them to their respective customers before responding. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in selling. Mr. Arnhem, sorry, what was your last name? Chin. Mr. Chin, I don't think you understand the scope of what we're proposing. This would be a $100 million development project. Your properties would be worth far more as part of this development than they are currently. I understand the scope. I'm still not interested. May I ask why? This represents a tremendous financial opportunity. Because I like this neighborhood the way it is. I like the local businesses, the community atmosphere, and the relationships that have developed here. Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching condescension. Mr. Chen, with respect, sentiment doesn't pay bills. This is a business decision, and the financial benefits should be obvious. The financial benefits are obvious, I agreed, but they're not the only consideration. What other considerations could possibly outweigh this kind of return on investment? Before I could answer, Maria from the boutique down the street walked in for her usual afternoon cappuccino. "Hi, Mike," she said cheerfully. "I heard there were some developers sniffing around the neighborhood." "There are," I replied, starting her drink. "They're interested in purchasing the entire block for a retail complex." "Oh no," Maria's face fell. "What does that mean for all of us?" "It means they haven't done their homework about who they're talking to," I said with a smile. "Don't worry about it." Patricia and her colleagues watched this interaction with growing puzzlement. "Mr. Chen," Patricia said after Maria had moved to a table, "I think there may be some misunderstanding about the scale and professionalism of our organization. Metropolitan Development Corporation has completed projects across the country. We're not some small-time developer." "I'm sure you're very professional," I replied. "But you're proposing to destroy a functioning community, to build something that could be built anywhere. We're proposing to improve the economic efficiency of this district." "For whom?" "For everyone. Economic development benefits the entire community." "Does it? What happens to Carlos, who runs the auto repair shop? Or Susan, who owns the boutique? Or the family that's been running the bakery for 20 years? As I mentioned, they would be compensated. Compensated for losing their businesses and their community? They could start new businesses. Where? In developments like the one you're proposing, where lease rates are designed for national chains with massive marketing budgets." Patricia was beginning to look frustrated. "Mr. Chen, you seem to be approaching this as an emotional issue rather than a business decision." "I'm approaching this as someone who understands the difference between economic activity and community value." "What's the difference?" "Economic activity measures money changing hands. Community value measures quality of life, relationships, and the kinds of places people actually want to live and work." One of the men with Patricia spoke up. "Those things are nice, but they don't create jobs or generate tax revenue." "Don't they? This coffee shop employs 12 people. Maria's boutique employs 6. Carlos's auto shop employs 8. The bakery employs 15. How many people would your retail complex employ from this neighborhood? Our developments typically create hundreds of jobs." "What kinds of jobs? And for whom?" "Retail positions, food service, security, maintenance." "At what pay levels? With what kind of job security? And would those jobs go to people who currently live in this neighborhood, or to people who could afford to live here after you've developed it?" The conversation was attracting more attention from customers and passers-by. Dr. Williams had abandoned his chess game to listen. Tommy, the college student, had closed his laptop. Several people from neighboring businesses had wandered in. "Mr. Chen," Patricia said, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation, "I think you may be overestimating the value of what currently exists here. This is a nice neighborhood, but it's not economically optimized." "What does economically optimized mean?" "Maximum revenue generation per square foot. Highest and best use of valuable real estate. And who determines what constitutes highest and best use? Market forces, consumer demand, economic principles. Those are abstractions. What about the people who actually live and work here? Do they get input into what constitutes the best use of their neighborhood? The market provides that input through purchasing decisions. The market that would be created by pricing out existing residents and businesses. Patricia was clearly growing impatient. Mr. Chen, I respect your attachment to this community, but progress requires change. You can't preserve everything exactly as it is. I'm not trying to preserve everything exactly as it is. I'm trying to ensure that change benefits the people who are already here rather than replacing them. What would that look like? It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about since our neighborhood business discussions began. Development that enhances existing businesses rather than displacing them, housing that's affordable for people who work in the area. Commercial spaces designed for local entrepreneurs rather than just national chains. That sounds idealistic, but economically unrealistic. Does it? This coffee shop started as a local business and has been profitable every year. Maria's boutique has been growing steadily. The bakery has been successful for 2 decades. The auto shop has more business than Carlos can handle. Those are individual success stories. We're talking about district-wide development. Why can't district-wide development build on individual successes rather than replacing them? Because small local businesses don't generate the kind of revenue that justifies major development investment. Says who? Patricia looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Says basic economic principles. Large-scale development requires large-scale returns. For whom? For the developers, for the investors, or for the community? For the developers and investors, obviously. That's how capitalism works. Is it? Or is that just one model of how capitalism can work? Dr. Williams spoke up from his corner table. Mike raises an interesting point about different models of economic development. Patricia turned to look at him. And you are? Retired economics professor. I've been watching this conversation with great interest. Then perhaps you can explain to Mr. Chen why large-scale development requires replacing existing businesses with more efficient operations. Actually, Dr. Williams replied, I'm not sure it does. There are successful examples of development that builds on existing business ecosystems rather than replacing them. Such as the Pike Place Market in Seattle, the Strip District in Pittsburgh, the Pearl District in Portland. All examples of areas that maintained local business character while adding new development. Those are tourist destinations. They're also thriving local business districts. The tourism emerged from the authentic local business activity, not the other way around. Patricia's colleagues were beginning to look uncomfortable. This conversation was clearly not proceeding according to their expectations. Mr. Chen, Patricia said, making one more attempt, let me be direct. We have significant financial backing and political support for this project. We're prepared to make offers that would be very difficult to refuse. How difficult? Difficult enough that most property owners would consider refusal to be financially irresponsible. And if I did refuse, we have other options for acquiring the properties we need. Such as? The city has eminent domain authority for projects that serve the public interest. The room went very quiet. Several customers had stopped their conversations to listen to this exchange. Are you threatening to use eminent domain to force property sales? I asked. I'm explaining the reality of major development projects. They proceed with or without the cooperation of individual property owners. Even when those property owners are operating successful businesses that serve the community, the greater good sometimes requires individual sacrifice. Who determines what constitutes the greater good? The City Council, based on economic impact studies and professional development assessments. Have you conducted studies on the economic impact of the existing businesses? We've conducted preliminary assessments. What did those assessments conclude? Patricia hesitated. They concluded that the area is underperforming its economic potential. Based on what metrics? Revenue per square foot, tax generation, employment density. Did those studies consider customer satisfaction, employee stability, community integration, or neighborhood character? Those factors are harder to quantify. So they weren't considered? They were considered but weighted appropriately against measurable economic factors. Jennifer had been listening to this entire conversation while trying to appear busy with training activities. She finally spoke up. "Excuse me," she said quietly, "but I'm new here, and I'm wondering, did anyone ask the existing businesses what they thought about this development idea?" Patricia looked at her with surprise. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "I'm Jennifer, the new assistant manager. I'm just curious whether the people who actually work in these businesses had input into the assessment of their economic value." Community input is part of the public hearing process. When does that happen? After the preliminary planning is complete. So the businesses get input after the major decisions have already been made? The major framework decisions, yes. The details can be adjusted based on community feedback. Dr. Williams chuckled from his corner. That's like asking passengers for input on flight destinations after the plane has already taken off. It's standard practice for development projects of this scale, Patricia replied defensively. Standard practice, I observed, doesn't mean best practice. What would best practice look like? Asked Tommy, who had been following the conversation from his laptop table. Community engagement from the beginning. Understanding what works about existing businesses before deciding what needs to change. Development planning that builds on community strengths, rather than replacing them. That would significantly slow down the development timeline, one of Patricia's colleagues pointed out. Would it? Or would it prevent the kinds of problems that slow down projects later when communities resist development they had no voice in planning? Patricia checked her watch. "Mr. Chen, we have other appointments today. Can I leave you with our preliminary offer documents to review?" "You can leave them, but my answer isn't going to change. I'd encourage you to review the financial details before making a final decision and to consider the broader implications of opposing a project with this level of support." What broader implications? Projects like this tend to proceed regardless of individual opposition. It's generally better for property owners to participate voluntarily rather than being compelled to participate later. The threat was barely veiled, but the audience of customers and neighboring business owners had heard it clearly. "I appreciate your directness," I replied. "It helps clarify the nature of this discussion." "What do you mean?" "I mean, this isn't really a business proposition. It's an ultimatum disguised as an opportunity." That's a rather dramatic interpretation. Is it? You're proposing to eliminate existing businesses, replace them with national chains, price out current residents, and use government authority to force compliance if property owners don't cooperate voluntarily. We're proposing economic development that benefits the broader community by destroying the existing community, by improving it. For whom? Patricia gathered her materials with obvious frustration. "Mr. Chen, I think we're at an impasse. Perhaps you'll reconsider after reviewing our offer. Perhaps you'll reconsider after learning more about what you're proposing to destroy." What would you suggest we learn? Talk to the businesses. Talk to the residents. Understand what makes this neighborhood work before deciding how to change it. We have conducted market research. Talk to them as people, not as market segments. Understand their needs, their concerns, their aspirations for the community. And if that research supports our development approach, then you'll have community support for your project instead of community resistance. And if it doesn't support our approach, then you'll have learned something valuable about the difference between economic efficiency and community value. After Patricia and her colleagues left, the coffee shop buzzed with conversation about the encounter and its implications for the neighborhood. "Are they really going to try to force you to sell?" asked Maria, who had stayed to listen to the entire discussion. "They're certainly suggesting they have that option," I replied, "but eminent domain requires demonstrating genuine public benefit, not just developer profit." "What happens now?" asked Carlos, who had walked over from his auto shop after hearing about the developers. "Now we find out how serious they are about community engagement versus how serious they are about forcing through their preferred project. And if they're serious about forcing it through, then we get serious about demonstrating the actual value of what exists here versus what they're proposing to replace it with." Dr. Williams was packing up his chess set. "This reminds me of similar development battles I've seen in other cities. The outcome usually depends on whether the community can articulate its value in terms that politicians and planners understand. What terms are those? Asked Jennifer. Economic impact, employment stability, tax revenue, property values. The same metrics developers use, but calculated to show the value of existing businesses rather than just potential new development. Can existing businesses compete on those metrics? Sometimes they can, especially when you account for factors like employee retention, customer loyalty, and community spending patterns that developers often overlook. The conversation continued for another hour, with more business owners joining as word spread about the morning's encounter. By the time people began returning to their shops and offices, we had the beginnings of a plan for documenting the economic and community value of our neighborhood's existing business ecosystem. This is exactly the kind of situation where our business association idea could be valuable, observed Susan from the boutique. You're right, I agreed. We need to coordinate our response rather than trying to address this individually. When can we meet? How about tomorrow evening? We can meet here after regular business hours. I'll spread the word, Carlos offered. Most of the business owners know each other, so we should be able to get good attendance. As the afternoon settled into its normal rhythm, I found myself thinking about the morning's encounter and what it revealed about different approaches to economic development and community building. Patricia and her team represented a model of development that prioritized financial returns for investors over outcomes for existing communities. Their approach assumed that maximum economic efficiency was the highest goal and that market forces would automatically produce the best outcomes for everyone. But my experience as both a business owner and a community member had taught me that markets were tools, not masters. They could be shaped to produce different kinds of outcomes depending on how they were structured and what values they were designed to optimize. The coffee shop was profitable because it optimized for customer satisfaction and community building, not just revenue maximization. The neighborhood was thriving because business owners collaborated and supported each other rather than just competing. Mike, Jennifer said during a brief lull in customer traffic, can I ask you something about this morning? Of course. You seemed really calm during that whole conversation, even when they were basically threatening you. Weren't you angry? I was concerned, but not angry. Why not? They were talking about destroying your business and your community. Because getting angry would have made me less effective at understanding their position and articulating my own. But they were so arrogant and dismissive. They were operating from assumptions that made sense within their framework. The question is whether those assumptions are correct, not whether the people holding them are likable. What assumptions? That economic efficiency is more important than community value, that bigger is automatically better, that market outcomes are always optimal, that development has to be either preservation or replacement rather than enhancement. Are those assumptions wrong? I think they're incomplete. They capture some important truths about how markets work, but they miss other important truths about how communities work. Such as? That people's satisfaction and well-being aren't just about maximizing consumption opportunities. That local businesses create different kinds of value than national chains. That communities that grow organically often work better than communities that are designed and imposed. So how do you prove that to people who only think in terms of revenue and profit? By demonstrating that community-based approaches can also be economically successful, and that purely economic approaches often fail to achieve their own goals because they ignore human factors. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Amanda Morrison from Pinnacle Consulting for our scheduled meeting about potential collaboration opportunities. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, she said, looking around the busy cafe. Not at all. Should we sit over there by the window? Actually, I was hoping we could meet somewhere more private. What I want to discuss involves some confidential information. We can use the office upstairs. I led Amanda up to the small office space above the coffee shop, which I used for administrative work and private meetings. The space was simply furnished but comfortable, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a view of the street below. This is cozy, Amanda observed as we settled in. It serves the purpose. What did you want to discuss? I want to talk about the Metropolitan Development Corporation project. I was surprised by this directness. I didn't realize Pinnacle was involved with that project. We're not, officially, but we've been tracking their activities, and we have some concerns about their approach. What kinds of concerns? They have a history of overestimating community support and underestimating local resistance. Several of their previous projects have faced significant delays and cost overruns due to community opposition. Are you offering to help with community relations? I'm offering to help you understand what you're really dealing with. Amanda pulled out a folder of documents. Metropolitan Development Corporation is backed by a private equity firm that specializes in what they call urban optimization projects. They identify neighborhoods with what they consider unrealized economic potential and implement standardized development approaches. Standardized how? Same mix of retail chains, same architectural designs, same marketing strategies. They've done versions of this project in 12 other cities. With what results? Mixed, from their perspective. Profitable for investors, but with significant community disruption and business displacement. Why are you telling me this? Because I think there might be a better approach, and because I think you might be uniquely positioned to implement it. What approach? Community-controlled development, local ownership, gradual growth, enhancement rather than replacement. That sounds like what we were already discussing this morning. Exactly, but now you have a specific threat that could galvanize community action and a specific alternative to propose. Amanda opened another folder. I've been researching your property holdings and business activities. You're in a much stronger position than Metropolitan realizes. How so? You own enough of the key properties to block their project if you choose to. But more importantly, you have the local relationships and development experience to offer a compelling alternative. What kind of alternative? Community-based development that builds on existing businesses while adding complementary new elements. Mixed-use projects that provide housing for people who work in the area. Retail spaces designed for local entrepreneurs rather than national chains. You're describing a completely different development model. I'm describing a development model that could be more profitable in the long term while being more beneficial for the community in the short term. How could it be more profitable? Lower community resistance, higher occupancy rates, stronger tenant retention, better relationships with local government. Amanda showed me financial projections and case studies from similar projects in other cities. The key insight, she explained, is that community-supported development often outperforms imposed development because it works with existing social and economic networks rather than against them. This is fascinating, but what's your interest in helping me pursue this approach? 2 reasons. First, I think it's a better business model that could be replicated in other markets. Second, I want to position Pinnacle as specialists in community-based development rather than just traditional commercial real estate. You're looking for a proof-of-concept project. I'm looking for a partnership with someone who has the vision, the resources, and the community relationships to demonstrate that this approach works. I studied the documents Amanda had provided. The financial projections were compelling, but the community impact assessments were even more interesting. These case studies show much higher small business survival rates in community-based developments. Because the development is designed to support existing businesses rather than replace them. Local businesses get access to better facilities and increased foot traffic without being priced out. And the developers still make money? Different kinds of money, lower profit margins per project, but higher success rates and better long-term returns. Plus the ability to replicate the model in multiple markets. What would partnership with Pinnacle look like? We provide development expertise, project management, and access to financing. You provide local knowledge, community relationships, and property assets. And decision-making authority? Shared, with community input throughout the process. I was intrigued by the proposal, but also cautious about moving too quickly. This is exactly the kind of alternative I'd want to explore, but I'd need to discuss it with the other business owners before making any commitments. Of course. Actually, I was hoping you'd consider presenting this option at your business association meeting tomorrow night. You know about that? Word travels fast in a neighborhood like this. Would you be open to having me attend to present the concept? I'd need to check with the other business owners, but I think they'd be interested in hearing about alternatives to the metropolitan approach. Excellent. I'll prepare a presentation that focuses on how community-based development could benefit existing businesses. As Amanda gathered her materials, I found myself processing the rapid evolution of the situation. This morning I'd been dealing with developers who wanted to eliminate our business community. This afternoon I was discussing a partnership that could enhance it. "Can I ask you something?" I said as we prepared to head back downstairs. "Sure." "Why didn't Pinnacle approach us with this concept before Metropolitan showed up? Why wait until there was a threat to the community?" Amanda paused. "Honestly, because we assumed that small business owners wouldn't be interested in large-scale development projects. We thought you'd prefer to keep everything exactly as it is." "So you made the same assumption that Metropolitan made, just in the opposite direction." "We did. And we were wrong. This morning's encounter with you taught me that there's a difference between wanting to preserve what works and being opposed to growth and change." "What's the difference?" "Preservation means protecting what you value. Opposition to change means protecting what you're comfortable with, regardless of whether it's actually valuable. And you think our business community represents what we value rather than just what we're comfortable with?" "Based on what I've observed today, yes. You've built something that works for customers, employees, and the broader community. That's worth preserving and enhancing." We returned to the main floor of the coffee shop, where the afternoon crowd was winding down and Jennifer was handling the closing responsibilities with impressive competence for her first day. "How did the meeting go?" she asked as Amanda headed for the door. "Very well. We'll have more to discuss at tomorrow night's Business Association meeting." "I'm excited to see how that goes. This has been quite a first day." "It has indeed, but it's given you a good introduction to how we approach business challenges here. By talking through them with the community instead of just making unilateral decisions?" "Exactly." As I helped with the closing procedures, I reflected on the day's events and what they revealed about different approaches to business ownership, community development, and problem solving. The morning's encounter with Metropolitan Development had illustrated one model: identify economic opportunities, develop standardized solutions, and implement them regardless of community impact. The afternoon's discussion with Amanda had outlined an alternative model: understand community needs, develop customized solutions, and implement them through collaboration rather than imposition. But perhaps most significantly, the entire day had demonstrated the value of staying connected to day-to-day operations, rather than delegating all the work to managers and employees. If I had been working from a corporate office rather than behind the coffee counter, I would have missed the conversation with Patricia and her team. I wouldn't have understood the threat to our community until it was too late to respond effectively. If I'd been focused on financial returns rather than community relationships, I might have been tempted by Metropolitan's offer, rather than recognizing the value of what we'd built here. If I'd been thinking like a traditional property developer rather than like a community member, I might have seen the situation as a financial opportunity rather than a community challenge. "You know what's interesting?" Jennifer observed as we finished cleaning the espresso machine. "What's that?" "Everything that happened today happened because you work behind the counter instead of just managing from an office somewhere." "How do you figure that?" "If you'd been in meetings all day, you would have missed the developer's visit. If you didn't know the customers personally, you wouldn't understand what makes this place special. If you weren't connected to the daily operations, you might not realize what the community would lose if this place got turned into a chain restaurant." "That's a good point. It makes me wonder how many business owners miss opportunities to understand and serve their communities because they're too removed from the actual work." "Probably quite a few." "Is that why you keep working behind the counter? To stay connected to what your business actually does and what your customers actually need?" "Partly, but also because I genuinely enjoy the work. Making a perfect espresso is satisfying in ways that reviewing financial reports isn't. Even though reviewing financial reports is probably more important for the business." "Is it?" "The financial reports tell me what happened last month. Working behind the counter tells me what's happening right now and what might happen next month." "I never thought about it that way." Most people don't. There's a cultural assumption that important work happens in offices and boardrooms, while operational work is somehow less valuable. But operational work is where you actually learn how your business functions, and where you build the relationships that make everything else possible. As we locked up for the evening, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow's business association meeting and the opportunity to explore community-based development approaches with my fellow business owners. The day had started with a threat to our community and ended with a potential opportunity to enhance it, but the real lesson wasn't about development strategies or business models. The real lesson was about the importance of staying connected to the work you actually care about, regardless of what other people think that work should look like. They had asked what I did for a living, and when I said I owned the place, they had choked. But owning the place was never the point. The point was doing work that mattered, with people who cared, in ways that created value for everyone involved. That was what made all the difference. And tomorrow we'd find out just how much difference it could make. That was what made all the difference. And tomorrow we'd find out just how much difference it could make. Tuesday evening brought the first official meeting of what we were calling the 3rd Street Business Association. I'd arrived early to set up chairs and prepare coffee for what had turned out to be a much larger group than expected. Word about Metropolitan Development's visit had spread throughout the neighborhood, and 23 business owners had confirmed their attendance. "This is incredible turnout," said Carlos as he helped me arrange seating. "I don't think we've ever had this many local business owners in one room before." "Crisis has a way of bringing people together," I replied, checking the coffee supplies one more time. "Speaking of crisis, have you heard anything more from the developers since yesterday?" "Not directly, but Amanda from Pinnacle Consulting is coming tonight to present an alternative development approach." "The same Amanda who was rude to you last week?" "That's the one, though she's proven to be more adaptable than I initially expected." The first to arrive was Dr. Williams, followed closely by Maria and Susan. Within minutes, the coffee shop was filled with people I'd known as neighbors and customers for years, but who I was now seeing in their capacity as fellow business owners and community stakeholders. "Before we begin," I announced once everyone had settled in, "I want to thank you all for coming. When I suggested this business association idea, I never imagined our first meeting would be focused on defending our community from hostile development." "Is it really hostile?" asked Janet from the bookstore. "I heard they were offering generous compensation for property acquisitions." "The question isn't whether their offer is generous," replied Dr. Williams. "The question is whether their development plan benefits the people who currently live and work here." "What's the difference?" asked Tom from the hardware store. "Generous compensation helps property owners who want to leave," I explained. "But it doesn't help business owners who want to stay, employees who would lose their jobs, or residents who would be priced out by the changes. Plus," added Susan, "compensation is a one-time payment. Losing your business and community relationships is a permanent loss." Amanda arrived exactly on time, carrying a presentation folder and a laptop. I introduced her to the group, briefly explaining her background and her proposal for an alternative development approach. "Thank you for allowing me to join your meeting," Amanda began. "I know my company's initial interaction with Mike was less than ideal, and I appreciate the opportunity to present a different perspective." She opened her laptop and connected it to the small projector I'd set up. "What I want to show you tonight is how community-based development could address the economic opportunities that Metropolitan sees in this area, while preserving and enhancing what makes this neighborhood special." The first slide showed aerial photos of the neighborhood, highlighting the existing businesses and residential areas. Metropolitan Development sees this area as underutilized because they're measuring it against standardized retail metrics, Amanda explained. But when you analyze it as a functioning business ecosystem, you discover that it's actually performing quite well. "What kind of ecosystem?" asked Carlos. "Complementary businesses that support each other, established customer relationships, stable employment, and integrated residential commercial use patterns." The next slide showed economic data about the neighborhood's businesses, employment numbers, revenue figures, customer retention rates, and local spending patterns. These businesses collectively employ 127 people, generate approximately $3.2 million in annual revenue, and maintain customer retention rates that are significantly higher than typical retail operations. "That's impressive," said Dr. Williams, "but how does it compare to what Metropolitan is proposing?" Metropolitan's projections show higher gross revenue, but much lower local employment and almost no local ownership. Their model brings in money from outside the community, but it also sends most of that money back outside the community. Amanda clicked to the next slide, which showed a comparison of economic impact models. Community-based businesses recirculate money locally at much higher rates than national chains. When you buy coffee from Mike, that money pays local employees, local suppliers, and local property taxes. When you buy coffee from a national chain, most of that money goes to corporate headquarters in another state. So local businesses are actually more economically efficient for the community? Asked Maria. Much more efficient. Studies show that locally owned businesses recirculate approximately 3 times as much money within the local economy as national chains. Tom raised his hand. But don't national chains bring in more customers from outside the area? They can, but they also face more competition from identical businesses in other areas. Local businesses with strong community ties tend to have more stable customer bases and higher customer loyalty. The presentation continued with case studies from other cities where community-based development had succeeded, financial projections for different development scenarios, and detailed plans for how such an approach could be implemented in our neighborhood. The key insight, Amanda explained, is that you don't have to choose between economic development and community preservation. You can have development that enhances the community rather than replacing it. What would that look like specifically? Asked Susan. Mixed-use buildings with ground-floor retail space designed for local businesses and upper-floor residential units affordable for people who work in the area. Shared infrastructure like parking and delivery areas that reduce costs for individual businesses. Community ownership structures that give local businesses input into development decisions. And the numbers work? Asked Carlos. The numbers work differently. Lower profit margins per square foot, but higher long-term returns due to lower vacancy rates and stronger tenant retention, plus significantly lower development costs due to community support rather than community resistance. I could see the business owners processing this information and beginning to understand that they weren't just choosing between preservation and change, but between different kinds of change. What would be required from us? Asked Janet. Participation in planning processes, commitment to long-term community development rather than just individual business interests, and willingness to coordinate with each other rather than just competing. We already do most of that informally, observed Maria. We refer customers to each other, we coordinate our hours and events, we help each other with staffing during busy periods. Exactly. Community-based development would formalize and expand those collaborative relationships. Dr. Williams raised a crucial question. This all sounds promising. But what happens if metropolitan development won't accept community input? What if they proceed with their original plan regardless of what we prefer? Amanda's expression grew serious. That's a real possibility. They have significant financial resources and political connections. But they also have vulnerabilities. What kinds of vulnerabilities? They need city approval for zoning changes, building permits, and infrastructure modifications. They need community cooperation for smooth construction and minimal delays. And they need market acceptance for their retail and residential units. Community resistance can impact all of those factors, I added. But community resistance works better when it's combined with viable alternatives, rather than just opposition. Which is why tonight's discussion is so important, Amanda said. If you can present a detailed alternative development plan with community support, it becomes much harder for city officials to approve a plan that the community opposes. The conversation continued for another hour, with business owners asking detailed questions about financing, timeline, implementation challenges, and potential risks. I have one more question, said Tom as the meeting began to wind down. Why should we trust Pinnacle Consulting? How do we know you won't just use our ideas and community relationships to benefit your own development projects? It was a fair and important question that I was glad someone had asked directly. You shouldn't trust us based on promises, Amanda replied. You should insist on legal agreements that protect community interests and give you real decision-making authority. What would that look like? Community ownership stakes in development projects, binding commitments to local hiring and local business inclusion, and veto power over major development decisions. You'd be willing to give the community veto power over your own projects? Asked Carlos. We'd be willing to structure projects so that community interests and developer interests are aligned rather than competing. How do you align those interests? By making community support necessary for project success rather than just nice to have. After Amanda finished her presentation and left, the business owners continued discussing the situation and their options. What do you think? I asked the group. Does the community-based development approach sound viable? It sounds too good to be true, said Tom honestly. But then again, everything Metropolitan is promising probably sounds too good to be true from their perspective. The question, said Dr. Williams, is whether we have enough time and resources to develop a competitive alternative before Metropolitan gets too far along with their planning. How much time do we have? Asked Susan. Unknown, I replied, but probably not very long. These large-scale development projects tend to move quickly once they get started. So what's our next step? Asked Maria. I think we need to form a formal organization, develop our own development plan, and present it to the city as an alternative to Metropolitan's proposal. Do we have the expertise to do that? We have Amanda and Pinnacle willing to provide technical expertise. We have Dr. Williams' economic analysis capabilities. And we have our own understanding of what works and what doesn't work in this community. What about funding? Asked Carlos. That's a good question. Community-based development typically requires different funding structures than traditional development. Different how? Community development finance institutions, local investment cooperatives, crowdfunding, and public-private partnerships, rather than just private equity and bank loans. Janet looked concerned. This is starting to sound very complicated and time-consuming. It is complicated, I agreed, but the alternative is letting someone else make decisions about our community without our input. And hoping those decisions turn out to benefit us, added Susan. Which, based on Metropolitan's presentation yesterday, seems unlikely. The meeting concluded with an agreement to meet again the following week, and to form working committees focused on different aspects of developing a community alternative: economic analysis, development planning, community engagement, and political advocacy. Before we adjourn, I said, I want to mention something that occurred to me during Amanda's presentation. What's that? This situation, having to choose between preserving what we have and accepting development we don't want, only exists because we weren't involved in planning from the beginning. What do you mean? If we had been proactively planning for community development rather than just reacting to external threats, we might have been able to shape growth in ways that benefited us, rather than just responding to growth that threatens us. Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. That's an excellent point. Reactive planning puts communities at a disadvantage compared to proactive planning. So maybe our real goal shouldn't just be to stop Metropolitan's project, but to develop our own capacity for ongoing community planning and development. You mean like having a permanent community development organization rather than just an emergency response committee? Asked Maria. Exactly. So we can influence change rather than just responding to it. As people gathered their coats and prepared to leave, Carlos approached me with a question. Mike, can I ask you something personal? Sure. You obviously have a lot of experience with property development and business planning. You could probably make a lot of money working with developers like Metropolitan. Why are you choosing to work against them instead? It was a thoughtful question that got to the heart of different approaches to business and community involvement. Because I live here, I replied. My business is here, my friends are here, my life is integrated into this community. Making money by destroying the place where I live doesn't make sense. But you could make money and then move somewhere else. I could, but then I'd just be someone who extracts value from communities, rather than someone who builds them. And that matters to you? It matters because communities are where life actually happens. You can make money anywhere, but you can only build relationships and contribute to community in places where you're actually present and invested. Even if it's more complicated and less profitable than just taking the money and leaving? Especially then. The most valuable things in life are usually more complicated and less profitable than the alternatives. As the coffee shop emptied and I began cleaning up from the meeting, Jennifer arrived for her evening shift. How did the meeting go? She asked, surveying the aftermath of chairs and coffee cups and presentation materials. Very well. The community is definitely interested in developing an alternative to Metropolitan's proposal. That's exciting. What happens next? A lot of work. Planning, organizing, research, and probably some difficult conversations with city officials and other developers. Are you worried about taking on such a big project? I'm concerned about doing it well, I replied, but I'm not worried about whether it's worth doing. What's the difference? Being worried about whether something is worth doing means you're not sure about your values or priorities. Being concerned about doing it well means you're committed to the outcome but want to be realistic about the challenges. And you're sure this is worth doing? I'm sure that having communities make decisions about their own development is better than having outside investors make those decisions for them. Even if it's more difficult and uncertain? Even then. Democracy is messier than autocracy, but it produces better long-term outcomes for the people who have to live with the results. Is that what this is about? Democracy versus autocracy? Partly. It's about whether communities have real influence over the changes that affect them, or whether they just get to react to changes that other people impose on them. Jennifer helped me finish cleaning up while we continued discussing the evening's developments and their implications for our business and community. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we prepared to close. "Of course. Do you think we can actually succeed? Can a group of small business owners really compete with a major development corporation?" "I think we can succeed at creating alternatives and giving people choices," I replied. "Whether we can prevent Metropolitan from implementing their project depends on factors beyond our control." "But you think it's worth trying, even if we might not succeed?" "I think it's worth trying because the alternative is definitely not succeeding." "What do you mean?" "If we don't try to influence development in our community, we're guaranteed to have no influence over it. If we do try, we might not get everything we want, but we'll definitely have more influence than if we don't try at all." "So it's about having agency rather than just hoping for the best?" "Exactly. It's about being active participants in shaping our community, rather than passive recipients of other people's decisions." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Patricia from Metropolitan Development, arriving alone and looking considerably less confident than during her previous visit. "Good morning," she said as she approached the counter. "I was hoping we could have a brief conversation." "Of course. What can I get you to drink?" "Just coffee black, please." I prepared her coffee and gestured toward a quiet table. "What's on your mind?" "I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday and address some potential misunderstandings." "What kind of misunderstandings?" "About our development approach and our interest in community input. I thought your approach was pretty clear. Replace existing businesses with national chains, acquire properties through voluntary sales or eminent domain, and implement a standardized retail development. That's a somewhat simplified characterization of our proposal. How would you characterize it?" Patricia paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "We're interested in maximizing the economic potential of this district while being responsive to legitimate community concerns." "What do you consider legitimate community concerns?" "Ensuring adequate compensation for displaced businesses, minimizing construction disruption, and maintaining some local character in the final development." "What about preserving existing businesses and maintaining affordable housing for current residents?" "Those are more challenging to accommodate within our development model." "Because your development model prioritizes investor returns over community outcomes?" "Because our development model requires certain financial parameters to be viable." "I understand. But from our perspective, those financial parameters conflict with community priorities." Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Chen, I'll be direct. We've heard that you're organizing community opposition to our project." "We're organizing community participation in development planning. Whether that constitutes opposition depends on whether you're interested in community input." "Of course we're interested in community input." "What would community input look like in your development process?" "Public hearings, surveys, focus groups to gather feedback on design elements and amenity preferences. But not input on fundamental questions like whether the development should happen or what kinds of businesses should be included. Those decisions are driven by market analysis and financial viability requirements. So community input is limited to cosmetic preferences rather than substantive priorities. Community input is important, but it has to be balanced against economic realities." "Whose economic realities?" the communities or the investors? Patricia was clearly struggling with this conversation. Mr. Chen, I'm trying to find common ground here. I appreciate that. What common ground do you see? We both want to see this district succeed economically. We both want development that benefits the community. We both want to avoid unnecessary conflict and delays. Those are good starting points. The question is how we define success, benefit, and community. What do you mean? You define success as maximizing revenue per square foot. We define success as maintaining a thriving local business ecosystem. You define community benefit as increased tax revenue and employment. We define community benefit as preserving existing relationships and opportunities while adding new ones. And how do we reconcile those different definitions? By developing approaches that optimize for both rather than assuming they're mutually exclusive. Such as mixed-use development that includes space for existing businesses, affordable housing that allows current residents to remain in the area, local hiring requirements, and local business inclusion mandates. Patricia was taking notes as I spoke. These ideas are interesting, but they would significantly impact our financial projections. They would change your financial model, not necessarily reduce your profits. Community-supported development often has lower costs and higher success rates than imposed development. Do you have examples of successful projects using this approach? We do. Would you be interested in reviewing case studies and financial comparisons? Yes, that could be helpful. Are you asking as someone who has decision-making authority for your project, or as someone who's gathering information for others to consider? I have some authority to modify our approach based on community input, but major changes would need approval from our investors. And how likely are your investors to approve changes that prioritize community outcomes over maximum returns? That would depend on how those changes affect overall project viability. So if we could demonstrate that community-based development approaches could be more profitable in the long term, your investors might be interested. Possibly. They're primarily concerned with risk management and return on investment. I've found myself in the interesting position of potentially having a productive conversation with someone who had started out as an adversary. Patricia, can I ask you something directly? Sure. Do you personally believe that your current development plan is the best approach for this community? She hesitated for a long moment. I believe it's the approach that our company knows how to implement successfully. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. What would the best approach look like, in your opinion? Something that preserved what works about this neighborhood while adding amenities and opportunities that would benefit current residents and businesses. That sounds like exactly what we're trying to develop through our business association. It does. Would you be interested in exploring whether there's overlap between what your company could implement and what our community actually wants? I think I would. But I'm not sure my colleagues would be as open to significant modifications to our standard approach. What would it take to convince them? Detailed financial projections showing that alternative approaches could be as profitable as our current plan, and probably some assurance that community support would translate into smoother permitting and construction processes. Both of those seem achievable if there's genuine interest in collaboration rather than just consultation. What's the difference? Collaboration means shared decision-making authority. Consultation means asking for opinions that you may or may not incorporate into decisions you make independently. Patricia paused, clearly processing this distinction. And you're only interested in collaboration? We're interested in whatever approach gives the community real influence over outcomes, rather than just the opportunity to comment on predetermined plans. She finished her coffee and stood up slowly. This has been enlightening. I think I understand now why you weren't impressed when we assumed you were just another minimum wage employee. People make assumptions, I replied with a smile. The question is whether they're willing to adjust those assumptions when they learn new information. You've certainly given me new information to consider. As Patricia gathered her materials and headed for the door, she turned back one final time. Mr. Chen, when people ask what you do for a living and you say you own this place, I'm beginning to understand that owning the place is probably the least interesting thing about what you actually do. Now you're getting it. She walked out into the morning sunshine, leaving me to serve the next customer, Mrs. Patterson, who had been waiting patiently through our entire conversation. "The usual?" I asked with a grin. "Please. And Mike?" "Yes?" "Thank you for fighting for our neighborhood. Thank you for being part of what makes it worth fighting for." They had asked what I did for a living, and when I said I owned the place, they had choked. But the real surprise was never about ownership. The real surprise was about understanding the difference between taking from a community and building one. And that difference, it turned out, made all the difference in the world. The end.